Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Casual Causal Talk, episode 2. Today, I'm honored to have Dr. Quentin Gallea. He's actually a popular request, an academician, and now a great problem solver for a lot of corporate entities. He's an expert in causal inference. And without further ado, let me welcome Dr. Quentin Gallea. Welcome, Dr. Quentin Gallea.
Well,
How are you
Venkat, it's a
today?
huge pleasure. It's a huge pleasure to be here. I mean, we have been exchanging for a while. I'm citing your name and the company Arima quite often when we discuss about online, about marketing impacts, and in particular MMM and causality. So really glad to exchange with you on these topics that are not only very useful but also our shared passion.
Thank you, and welcome once again, Quentin. So this is one question that I ask everyone, in the very beginning. How did you get started in causality, causal inference? Can you, give us a perspective on it?
So how did I start, or how should people start?
No, how did you start?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. I'm not exactly entirely sure. It might start with a bit of abstract and big picture answer. The thing is, if you know me and people who knows me have seen and witnessed that I'm obsessed by causality. It's my passion, my obsession. I think about this day and night, and I see it everywhere. And it's going way beyond just work, and I'm just deeply fascinated by this field for many reasons. And I think it dates back for just my curiosity, even as a child, trying to answer why. But I kept asking this question actually, why, and trying to find these answers. And at some point, naturally, while being at university, learning statistics, and in particular as a trained economist, I learned econometrics, where causality is central. Suddenly, I naturally ended up in this field that was basically the scientific way to answer these questions. Why? That I was obsessed for many years. I really remember even in class when I was young, professor in marketing, for example, that will tell this impacts that, and this is if you do this, you'll have something on sales. And I remember wondering, how do they know? And long story short, they didn't, because they didn't know about causality. But I really remember this. So that's a very abstract question, but more practically speaking, I fell in love with statistics in particular when I arrived at university as a young undergrad in economics, and then I focused on econometrics, which is one of the two main field focus on measuring causality. You have really from computer science, like the Judea Pearl view, and you have from econometrics also the way to answer causality because it's central in economics. And then I pursued this, and I'm still uh, obsessed, learning every day about this fascinating field.
Nice. One of your earlier posts that I remember vaguely is that I know you were being humble about it when you said that, you were not that smart of a student in your college or school days, but then, beyond that, you just learned everything on your own, kind of like an autodidact. And I think I related quite well to that. I wasn't particularly a very smart statistician when I was doing my undergrad. Some of the statistics I had to, redo myself, relearn myself. I vividly remember that post graduating, I kind of did everything in the sense that how did, CLP come about? All those things I kind of relearned it and I taught it myself again. And it stuck with me because when you teach it yourself, you learn it. Right. So how has it been for you? I know you've been being a little bit humble when you said that you were not smart. I know you are. But how important is it that, a person should be a self-learner or an autodidact to learn statistics or say causality?
So yeah, so back to the school thing. So it was really about school. In my early days, I was really not made for school. When I was young, I was distracted. I had to move. I could not make sense of what. I mean, in the sense, make sense. I was not interested. It made no sense to learn these things mainly at school. Then I did an apprenticeship actually, where I worked on design and things like this, and suddenly it clicked, and I was like really working many hours, deeply focused, and loved these things. And the results completely shifted from the worst to the class to the very good in the class, to say the least. And then basically, what happened is that I decided to go further and start going to university. So in Switzerland, it's a country where it's really easy to, even if you didn't go for the path for university, to catch up. So then I went to university later, actually, and then I was really deeply in love with math, statistics, econometrics, and indeed, I mean, I'm still I can be very passionate about some things, and the other are very low interest. So, for example, I was really struggling to focus on law, accounting that we had to follow in the first year, and I would dedicate all my energy in reading books in statistics. So, related to this, indeed, as an undergrad, I was not a big fan of being in class, so I would follow the slides, read extensively the book on myself, just by myself, and work on my own and reading things. The thing is, I'm still learning a ton. It has been like more than a decade that I'm working on this learning about causal inference daily, and I still spend at least 1 day per week learning new things, reading the research articles mainly these days. That's what it will be, reading cutting edge research, and and there is so much to learn. And every 6 months I can look back and say, wow, I've learned so much more. I know so much more than before, and I find this incredibly enriching, motivating, and just beautiful. It teaches you also to be humble. The world is complex, and if you want to master something, it takes time and effort. And also in the era of AI, I mean, many people have this, including LLMs, which are not people, but these tools that are available to people, have this surface understanding of many things. And I think that's it's even more valuable today to go very deep in a topic, to be able first to assess the outputs of these AI models, to go beyond the type of answers that everybody will get easily with any LLMs like ChatGPT. And so today it's translated by reading a lot the literature, but also for helping people, for helping in your audience. That's the main question I get these days. And for quite a while is, how do I start? How can I learn causal inference? So actually I wrote an entire guide, and we can share this. It's a free guide on medium.com that was initially published with Towards Data Science, which I called something like how to learn causal inference on your own and for free. And here I give the best resources. All these resources are free. You can start from very almost no knowledge, no prerequisite, and you can just follow the guide and access for free all the best resources. So that's something that I find beautiful in causal inference. It's the best authors share all their content for free. So you have the author like Scott Cunningham, who has this book, The Mixtape. It's free. You have Python codes, Taita codes, R codes. You can just read it today. Go on the website, The Mixtape, and you'll get this. You have the ebook also by Matheus Facure, also economics or causal inference for the brave and true. Also free, also with codes. And now if you want double machine learning or causal AI, which we'll talk later, you also have an entire book about one of the methods, which is called double machine learning, that's available for free with code, with data, and made by the author, the creator of this methodology. So the best person in there to speak about this. So I find this just beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah. So one of the things that I've noticed is that, you're one of the rare person who has transitioned from the academia to the corporate world. How has been this transition for you? Of course, you have a penchant on the internet that, you simplify a lot of complex topics. Did that skill also, play a vital role when you made this leap from, academia to the corporate world?
Yeah, so it's central. So basically, the the bottom line is like what drives me is to help society. And when I was doing research, you have issues everywhere, but I felt that doing research, publishing even in top journals, sometimes even doing a lot of communication, it's hard to reach to a wide audience, to share the result, to communicate these results to the population, to help society. or it takes a lot of time, and then it's something that's not so much valued often in academia. So there was this constant tension, and also because I wanted to teach a lot, so I started reducing the amount of research, which is very not something to do if you want to have an academic career, because it's the only thing that matters is basically your output of research. And so I focused also a lot on communication and teaching, because I think that's where I can help most of the people. And indeed, I made this transition also because I thought, how can I help society? Well, let's take all this knowledge outside from academia, outside from this ivory tower. Because the crazy thing, one of the multiple reasons why causality is fascinating in causal inference, is that it's required everywhere, literally everywhere. And we can dive into this later, from marketing, from personal decision to political decision, from business decision. I mean, we always ask, how can we increase sales, the values, lifetime value of the clients, conversion, retention, what explains the loss in the last quarter? All these questions are causal questions. So it's everywhere. Yet the share of people who understand causal inference is very tiny. It's niche. And many people even ignore that you have a whole scientific way to approach causality. So I think that this is a unique opportunity to help society. So I decided to take all this knowledge and bring it outside. Now, back to your point. It is indeed central to communicate efficiently, because I've witnessed early, when I moved away from academia, if I was saying causal inference, it sounds scary. It sounds obscure. It sounds like statistics. And most of the people don't like statistics. Despite the fact that they use it and need it, they are like, there is bad publicity for some reason that I'm not sure I understand for statistics. And so first there was this language that I had to change, to adapt, to be sure that people will listen, will not be scared by technical terms, even if today I'm still very attached to the right terminology. And I don't want to use the wrong words or things. So I will still but just take time to create this common language and vocabulary. And for example, now we have causal AI. And this is a bit more convenient because people are like, oh, I know AI, or they think that they are. And now there is this twist, causal AI. I'm curious, I want to know more. And it seems less scary for many people than causal inference. But essentially, saying causal AI is kind of a PR strategy. Is honestly just, it's basically what we have been doing for 20 years. And you have a small twist, of course, of AI on causal inference. Cool. And can talk about this later. And there are some very powerful tools that we have been teaching together, by the way, double machine learning. And but I think essentially making this accessible was centrally my career, but is central to reach out to businesses. Last point, but I can talk for way too long about this, but I let you react also, is when it works in a company, when causal inference truly works, is where everyone understands what's happening and have the right terminology. So that's exactly why. So, for example, I was talking with this very fantastic person from Zalando, and he was telling me like everybody understand this. You at from executive to data scientists to marketing experts, they understand causal inference. They understand what's the goal. They understand when you need it, and they have the right terminology, and it allows the whole company to use the right tools in an efficient way. So that's exactly why basically my own company is called the Causal Mindset, because the first thing is to shift the mindset and take everybody with you. So you have to be able to talk, to write the right words, to pick the interest of the right people. So for example, you go to a CFO and you say the chief financial officer, and you can tell them, well, you know what, why you want causal inference? Because that's the only tool that will precisely measure the return on investment. So you want to quantify how what's the return on this AI spending are? You need causal inference and you'll get the correct answer. The rest, they are useful, but they might suffer from some endogeneity bias. So basically they might be biased because they are just correlational. And yeah, so basically that's the main thing. Indeed, finding the right terminology and speaking to people when I move from academia to the business world is still central, and I'm still adapting.
Great. I think Causal Mindset is an excellent name. I really like it. And just to let the audience know that, you have been a guest lecturer to our causality courses, at least 2 times already. And, most of the participants already love you. And I think the fundamental question they always ask is, hey, how do I explain causality to my CEO or CMO, right? So how would you explain what is causality to the general audience, the layman?
Mhm. So I have usually stories for everyone, for each different person and post, with something that might click. And usually I like to first start with a conversation with the person to understand what are the causal questions they are asking. They didn't realize maybe it was causal. And then I can frame this. But long story short, usually I always take the following example in my talks. The most basic one that usually speaks for everyone is the following. Is let's say, Venkat, that before this podcast, or let's do it with the audience. Let's say you want to listen to this podcast, but you have a headache and you really planned to listen to this podcast. So you wait a bit and you still have your headache. So after a while, you decide to walk, to drink some tea, to get some rest, and it's still there. So you decide to take a pill. And after a while, you start listening to the podcast and you realize that your headache is gone. But then, if you're like me, or probably like Venkat, you start frowning and thinking, but was it really the pill? Or was it because I drank tea or plenty of fluids, or just because time went by? The thing is, you'll never know, right? You'll never know for sure what was the cause that solved this issue. Because all of these factors are confounded, they are mixed together. And the only way to perfectly answer this question will be to have parallel worlds. In one of the two worlds, you take the pill, in the other, you don't. And as we don't have parallel worlds, we have to basically emulate this or try to get as close as possible to this parallel world story. And that's the whole concept of causal inference. Basically, so that's one thing, is to really explain causal inference with a simple example, helping people to realize that everything is multifactorial. And basically, the goal, if you want to assess a causal effect, is to separate all these different effects to pin down one specific effect. That's one kind of example. If it's in marketing, usually, honestly, it's the standard things. I will be like, usually you increase your spending when you have a higher demand. It can follow seasonality. It can follow some events, some sports events. So you sell football jersey and you spend more on ads closer to some major tournament. If you don't take into account these external factors, this seasonality, the competition, other factors, what we call confounder, technically speaking, basically you will overestimate the effect of your campaign because you spend more when the demand is higher. And then basically it leads to miscalculation, to biased estimation, and misallocation of the budget. So how do you know? And that's a typical example. So in marketing, it could be about causes. You had a bad quarter. Was it strategic decision? What is the weather? How do you disentangle potential causes? You need causal inference to do so. So I have many examples, but these are a few angles that I typically take.
No, that was a great one. One of the ways I explain causality to people is that I think I also wrote about a LinkedIn post, right? I say that, it helps us go from the predictive realm to the deterministic realm. How much do you agree with this, commentary?
So from predictive to the causal, or what do
Yeah,
you mean
let's put it
exactly
like
in
a
this sense?
predictive or uncertain realm to a more deterministic realm. Would
Okay,
you agree with
so
that assessment?
the only thing is that deterministic will be, in my view, is that you really have no standard errors. Basically, you have no variability, and even if it's causal, you'll have some uncertainty, right?
Mhm.
But I see your framing. But let me use a slightly different one that is highly valued these days,
Mhm.
um, which is with a similar line of thought as the one you just shared. The thing is, everybody knows AI more or less today. You have at least a mass of people in data science who knows about AI and often master it. And so most of the people understand prediction. They understand predictive inference. So you want to predict something. And here is usually the example I highlight to show and highlight this very important fact today is that predictive inference is not made, the goal is not to assess causally things. These are different toolbox. And the main example I take is the following. Let's say you look outside to understand predictive inference, you look outside and you see that people are wearing shorts and t-shirts and have sunglasses. This is a strong predictor that it's warm and sunny outside. So this is basically a simple predictive algorithm. You observe the clothes of people and then you infer about the weather. So let's say if your business is selling ice cream, this might be useful. I like this example because what we observe are not causes. They are they are good predictors of the weather, but they are not causes. It's not because you wear sunglasses that it's sunny. It's the opposite, by the way, of course. And this also helps to highlight first that predictive inference relies on correlations, and hence you should not use predictive inference, so traditional AI, to answer causal questions. That's one thing. The second is it highlights also that causal inference is completely different. You want to understand cause and effects. In the case of the sunglasses, you basically ask a completely different question. In predictive inference, you observe the world and you try to predict the value of something. In causal inference, you try to understand what will happen with the world if you change something in the system. What will happen with my ice cream sales if I force people to wear sunglasses? Well, probably nothing, because it's not a cause. It was a consequence from the weather. And this also highlights why causal inference is central for decision making. Because if you rely on correlation and predictive inference and you interpret this as causal, it will be misleading.
Yeah, I think that distinction was really great. The distinction between predictive inference and causal inference. And of course, you know about our line of work, that is MMM, market mix modeling. And there are some vendors, who are split into two camps. They believe that, prediction is all it takes and everybody should just focus on prediction. But deep down, there are other set of people, who believe that no, MM is all about accurate attribution, which means that you need to pay attention to the causal inference first. And only if you get the causal inference right, you can predict things right. Otherwise, you can, blindly make any algorithm predict really well. But is it causal at the end of the day is a big question, right? So what's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a really hot topic. So the first thing that drew me to MMM was exactly this. It was some people who will present MMM as causal without understanding the caveats. So I
Mhm.
mean, MMM are very useful. It's a huge, very important piece of information tool for marketing attribution. It helps to have this big bird eye view on attribution between multi-channels and help with most of the algorithm to optimize in a second step and get basically the big suggestions and potential movements of your marketing attribution and hence your budget allocation. So it's incredibly useful, but it's important to recognize that most of the time this is based on predictive algorithm, predictive inference, which might suffer from what we call, technically speaking, endogeneity issues. It's biased, it's not exactly causal, it might be amplified by some factors that we call confounders. And then you have in this basically realm of marketing advice and tools, you have Arima Labs, who understood this very well and communicate a lot about this. So that's why I'm really glad to be here. Is basically first is to recognize the potential limitation of MMM without saying it's useless. No, it's very important. It has some limitation. Causal inference has some limitations. I mean, all the models have limitations. You need
Yeah,
assumptions.
all models have
Um,
assumptions. Yeah.
exactly, and let's not forget this. So I mean, MMM is a very useful piece of information. It's important that people widely recognize that most of the time it's correlational evidence, which still is useful with some limitation, and you want to augment and go beyond by first including some causal inference concepts, for example, controlling for some major confounders, and combining these correlational evidence with causal evidence. As you're doing at ARIMA, you will do some quasi-experimental methods to augment your model, to complement the model, which will answer different type of questions. So I think overall, it's MMM are very useful. It's the same as predictive inference. I have nothing against predictive inference. I mean, recommendation algorithm, which are in e-marketing very powerful. I mean, you think about Meta, Netflix, Spotify, Zalando, Booking, Airbnb. All these are really very rely a lot on recommendation algorithm. Recommendation algorithm are predictive inference. So it's traditional predictive AI, and you don't need to understand the cause. They don't need to understand why I might like this suit on this e-shop. You don't care about this. So sometimes correlational predictive inference can be very useful. You don't always need to answer and understand cause and consequences.
Great.
Then we
I think
can
there was
discuss this.
Yeah, I think there was one joke that, all these companies are, just one lawsuit away from going from predictive inference to causal inference. Because let's take example of, Meta or, Netflix. If they are filed a lawsuit on why did you recommend these movies to people or why did you recommend this news to the people, they have to open their algorithm and tell people, hey, we did this because, of X, Y reason. And that is again going into the why rather than what happened, right? So that again opens the door to causal inference. Yeah, please go ahead. You were saying something. Yeah.
Hmm. Yes, no. So exactly. But again, I mean, sometimes the thing is, in most of these companies, these algorithms are deep learning models, and it's hard to interpret, right? So it's huge, complex with a lot of parameters, and it's hard sometimes to understand exactly what drives the prediction. So even in image recognition or detection, for example, sometimes the algorithm will detect pattern, and it's not easy for a human to interpret. That's one main difference also between predictive AI and causal inference, which is particularly useful in this AI age, is that causal inference is really interpretable. You really focus on one factor, you interpret clearly the coefficient, the magnitude, you understand, and you draw even the graph, this affect this and that, which is called the causal graph, and technically speaking, DAG, directed acyclic graph. And this transparency, interpretability is also incredibly useful for business decisions because you have the assumptions clearly stated, you have the mechanism, the connections that are here and that you can explain to an executive as well.
You touched upon the quasi-causal experiments, right? I mean, there are two ways to establish causality. One is your traditional experiments, RCTs, and then you have the quasi-causal experiments. In your experience, which one have you first of all used more or have seen used more, and why?
Yeah, I love this question. So my take is, I think, similar to yours, but all the models have strengths and weaknesses. So I'm teaching also a lot, and I've been teaching for, I'm not sure, maybe last 10 years, maybe a bit less, to experienced medical researchers who will basically be PI of a lab with animals to test drugs and different things in medical research. So I've been teaching biostatistics for them. So of course, causality is central because most of the time you want to understand cause of issues and consequence of some effect of some drugs or behavioral change and things. And basically, the thing is, the vast majority of people in these labs will work with what we call inbred strains of rats. So basically, rats that are, or mice that are almost clones. They are inbred for like 30 generations. They're almost cloned. They have the same
Mhm.
poor lab life with the same food. So basically, there you are very close with randomized control trials in the medical sector. Most of the time, you're very close to the parallel worlds. Everything is very similar. If it's done well, you still have many things that can go wrong, but that's a different topic that we can get later. But let's assume everything is done well. You have a very strong, what we call internal validity. It's very close to the parallel world. You can claim causality with a very high level of reliability and trust. But this often comes at the cost of external validity. The fact that now you have a very strong evidence for these very similar rats. But what about a different breed of rats, of mice? What about humans? The external validity is huge, so the capacity to extrapolate beyond the scope of the study is a huge topic and often a weakness in randomized experiments. In this type of experiment. In marketing, it's not the case. Why? Because most of the time, if you A/B test your Netflix, you're A/B testing The unique thing is that you're testing your treatment directly on your target audience in the wild while they are using the app without them knowing it. So basically here you have both. In this specific setting of randomized experiments with online platform with a large set of customers you and large sample size, you have both. You have large external validity. Basically, it's you're testing exactly what you want to test in the wild, and internal validity because you're able to randomize well. So this is one different thing. But then back to quasi-experimental methods. So the thing is, in many situations, you cannot randomize, or randomization has some limitation. For example, you cannot randomize, I don't know, you have a few shops and you want to change the layout within the shop. You cannot really, due to many technical constraints, you won't randomize between shops most of the time or have enough large sample size. So sometimes it's not possible to randomize. And sometimes it's not ethical. I mean, in research, you're not going to expose humans to high lethal, dangerous dose of pollutants. You're going to do this with the rats, but not to humans. So then you have another family of method to assess causality, which is what I've done the most in my career as a researcher. It's quasi-experimental methods. It's when you exploit observational data to uncover causality. I've done this initially for big research questions like what's the effect of COVID lockdowns on the spread of the virus? What's the effect of sending weapons on the probability of conflict? These are things that you're not going to randomize. So you really need observational data to be able to uncover causal effects. And again, in marketing, it's also a very powerful set of tools to complement your toolbox, where you cannot randomize. And to complement MMM, for example, sometimes you want to use these quasi-experimental models. So that's basically how I see it. It's really different tools with different pros and cons.
Yeah, I mean, I see that, in marketing, we can never do RCTs because, of course, you can randomize people, as you just alluded to, the Netflix example, you can randomize really well, but can you control the people? That's the big question, right? You cannot control their behavior. You cannot obviously imprison them and say that, hey, you're going to watch only these ads, for the next 1 week or let's say 1 month. You can never do that. And there will always be a violation of satwa, right? I mean, of course, we're going to talk about all these technical terms down the line. But yeah, I think given those constraints, quasi-causal experiments, are the best fit for marketing, I would say. Okay, taking the talk to the another level, how do you convince the C-level people to adopt causal methods? Because I think you also have started your company, the Causal Mindset, and you talked about changing the mindset, right? From my experience, coming to MMM, it's a hard task, right? First of all, you have to educate people and tell them that, hey, these are the benefits of doing MM really well. You will save on your advertising spends, you will get better ROI and all that, but that's an educational process. And when it comes to causal inference, I think the task becomes at least 2 times harder because it's much a difficult topic altogether, right? So what is your take on that?
Fantastic question. And it's a tough one.
Hmm.
It's really a tough question and a tough task. So as I said earlier, it's really about finding the right pain point where people understand quickly, oh, here I need causality actually. And such that they click easily. The thing is, which I'm still puzzled about this actually, by doing this for years to thousands of people, it's how many people are puzzled by the term causal, and you need something that is causal. That's we need causality. I'm always surprised that people are. I feel that they feel like I never thought about this. What do they mean? It seems obscure. It seems like something I should not care about, because also they never hear about this terminology often. So one thing I often say is, first I explain, when a return on investment, which is something that C-suits usually care about. A return on investment should be a causal metric. It's a return, it's a consequence on something, on an investment, a cause. So if you want to measure properly return on investment, you need causal inference. So usually I'll try to make something very simple, very direct, and tie it to ROI. It could be more specific, like ROMI or ROAS. That's one thing. Another entry point, because that's one of the main thing I'm communicating and doing these days, is helping about to use causal inference to measure AI impact. So basically, many companies are spending a lot on AI, and then there's kind of many unknowns about the business impact of this. And this again is something that sometimes concern C-suits. So they're like, we know that we invested on this a bit by fear of missing out. And it will be great to know the return, but it seems that everybody is struggling to get the return and understand how to capture actually the impact of AI. It's very complex. And you're like, wait, but you know, you have an entire field that exists. It's not from yesterday, for decades, that help you to answer the impact of something. If you want to measure the impact of something, you're talking about causality. It's a consequence of something. Impact evaluation is about causality. So you are serious about your AI adoption? You want to know if it works? You should use causal AI and causal inference. We talk about causal AI if we still have time later,
Yeah.
but basically causal inference. And these two are kind of often the entry points. But it takes a while. I mean, that's why I always argue if I have to help a company, that I also talk to all the C-level and executive and do really a workshop to help, entire workshop that you've seen parts of this, to help them in a non-technical yet rigorous way to shift the mindset such that they can better communicate with their data team, it improves data literacy, and then if they understand the benefit, it's way easier to exchange with the data team, because when they ask for funding, they understand why they need it, they can show the results. And I mean, that's also something Matheus Facure said, I think, on the podcast with Alexander Molak. He said at some point, like, sometimes you even kind of don't really say causal. You just say, yeah, I'm going to, you keep the standard terminology about prediction because people will be puzzled and maybe even reluctant. So even sometimes you're not necessarily using this terminology because it might scare some people. But that's a different context. It was, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, predictive inference is an easier sell because, often you can tell the CEO or the CFO, hey, look, this is the ground truth and this is what we predicted, and look how close we came, right? But when it comes to causal inference, is there a metric which proves the accuracy of, causal inference as easily as, let's say, predictive inference?
I love this question so much. And that's why I'm smiling. I just enjoy this conversation and generally speaking, discussing about causal inference. So short answer, not really, right? Because you don't have a test to test and prove causality. So basically it relies to do proper causal inference, it relies on two things: technical knowledge. Then you'll have the right metrics, like the right tool, the right model. You have some p-values that will tell you if something is statistically significant or not. But that's just one part. You have domain knowledge, and domain knowledge is as important as technical knowledge in causal inference, because domain knowledge is the thing in causal inference that will allow you to understand if the assumption you are putting on the model, which often are not testable, are plausible, are correct. If you can assume these things that you often cannot test directly, and then that's one part to assess if a model is correct, is really to have a deep domain, very good domain knowledge. And then of course it's to do robustness, sensitivity test. Is you have a doubt about something, you have different ways of doing it, you're not 100% sure, and you test how robust are the estimates when you change and tweak a few things, when you change the time period, the data sets, the way you coded some variables, if it's really robust to the inclusion of additional features or controls, and these kind of things. So if everything is relatively stable and you can really challenge the model, you have a lot of higher certainty. And also usually it's really, I like this metaphor. Proving causality is like finding the culprit of a crime. It's exactly the same thing. You want to say this person did this thing. It's the cause. So very rarely when you have a crime, you'll have a HD video where you exactly see what's happening. Sometimes you have piece of evidence and you pile up evidence until you have basically discarded every alibi and every other suspect. So that's exactly what you do in causal inference. It's basically you have your first model, and then someone says, but what if there is this violation of this assumption? You get back to your data if you need, or you already have an answer, but you get back to your data and you try to include maybe an additional control or test for this potential pathway by changing some things in your model. You see that the model survives, the estimation survives. Good. Then you can again maybe, and basically it's usually this iterative test that sounds a lot more than what you do in scientific research, but in a shorter time frame, that's what we should do also in the business world.
So basically, it is a huge detective work, right?
It's exactly detective work. That's
Yeah.
again a reason why it's fascinating, right? Who doesn't love like the CSI, that was so popular before? You're doing exactly the same thing. You're trying to pin down the culprit.
Yeah, one of our product is also interestingly, named as a pun on detective work. Of course, I'm not going to reveal it right now, but it's upcoming. It's centering around DID. Yeah, talking about DID, right? I see DID like what linear regression is to data science. Just like an hello world programming. Everybody who comes into the causality world, they are like, hey, I want to know DID. It's relatively simple, but there are assumptions behind it, right? When you compare it with, let's say, a technique like synthetic control methods, my opinion is that, at least DID is much more grounded in reality in terms of assumptions. But when you get to the SCCM, right, synthetic control methods, the assumptions are a little bit more foggy, more vague. What's your take on that in terms of, the reasonableness of the assumptions? How important is the reasonableness of your assumptions in causal inference?
So I think again, all models suits different setup. The idea is very useful not only because technically speaking, if you do the canonical did, it's very simple. It's very simple, just linear regression with main terms and an interaction term. So it's very simple. But also the canonical did is very simple to explain to non-technical people, which is very convenient. You see the pre-period before the shock, you see that they are parallel. Basically, they behave the same. Okay, so this is a good counterfactual. You have a shock and you have just one die differ. And usually it's very intuitive. That being said, of course, the idea is great, but you have a huge functional form assumption, very strong functional form assumption, basically. And the thing is, there have been a lot of research, right? And recently, many papers discussing these assumptions. I actually on the last 15 years, but recently, very good papers summarizing the state of the research. There is one chapter in the book by Matheus Facure, which is it's called the Did Saga, the chapter. And it's a fascinating chapter to highlight this evolution and the limitation of the did, the definitive setting. So first, and then we go to SCM. But then basically now what you can do and what I was teaching this 2-3 weeks ago, it's basically what you do now is you can relax some of these assumptions, functional form assumptions from the canonical definitive, and have something that's way more robust and flexible. So basically leading to two-way fixed effect definitive, which has some limitations, but then you can evolve of two-way fixed effect event study, which is a did type event study. So when you have way more flexible functional form that can account for dynamic treatment effects, which it's central in marketing, because the fact that, for example, if you want to measure the impact of an ad, it's of course you won't run just a simple linear regression with an indicator variable ads, no ads, because the ads might have delayed accumulating some effects,
The ad
lagged
stock
effects.
effect.
So
Yeah.
basically, ad stock effect, exactly.
Yeah.
So basically, it's a non-linear complex effect. So you want to relax all these functional form strong assumption, and typically the event study will allow to do this. So that's basically the state of affair, is that now you have way more flexible models that are really like that are evolved definitive models. Back to SCM. SCM is not trivial to explain. So it's cool because again it's visual. you really see. So again, to be sure that everybody is aware what we mean by this, a synthetic control method is basically, it starts like this. Causal inference, the goal to measure causal effect is to compare a treated group to a counterfactual. Basically, a good counterfactual will be, the ideal counterfactual will be the parallel world, the treated without the treatment during the treatment period. So you cannot have this, so you try to find a good counterfactual, something that will simulate this or be as close as possible to this. So in diff, of course, it's not easy to find a control group which are within this 10 region, the good combination of these that will act as a good control. Maybe none of these alone are good counterfactual. Maybe if you average them and you put them together, it's not a great counterfactual as well. So then it leads to a huge headache, which has been solved kind of with synthetic control method, right? So the synthetic control method will do the following. It's in the data-driven way. You will basically define the counterfactual, and this counterfactual will be constructed with a pool of donor. So basically, you give potential control, and it will create a weighted average of these some of these elements in this pool of donor in order to minimize the distance in the pre-period. So basically to match the treated group in the pre-period. So I know you know this. It's just to explain to the audience also. So basically, that's the idea of SCM. Now, it's really cool because visually you see that you can control often a good counterfactual, but it has advantages. Again, it's data-driven, so it might reduce, if you're doing it well, the risk of p-hacking. Basically, you just select the counterfactual in order to have your effect. Because here it's in data-driven way, it's really transparent. So at the end, you know that, let's say, your synthetic control is built by 15% of region A, 25 of region C, etc., etc. So you really know which region are exploited. But at the same time, it's some fun. It's if you have several regions, it's also not trivial to understand and test and ensure that the identifying assumptions are correct, because you might have several regions. And it's harder sometimes to precisely understand and check the validity of these assumptions. For example, to be sure that you don't have other shocks in these regions specifically. That's one thing. And the inference is also a bit special with synthetic control method. It's kind of this old way of computing p-values, but it's less intuitive, I would say, than usual setups which are very simple, and the math are also a bit complex and involved. So compared to a diff in diff, where it's essentially just a linear regression, multiple linear regression with dummies, it's way more complex to sell, to understand, and to do inference with it. So that's the part that I'm a bit less excited about with SCM.
Yeah, I mean, when we are applying these techniques to, the real world problems, I mean, one thing that I tell my team is that, we should not be really a stickler of, assumption, right? In the sense that, of course, there's parallel trend and of course there's synthetic trend, but you will never find the exact parallel trend between two markets, right? In DID, or if you have SCM, you will never find the exact perfect synthetic twin, so as to speak, right? I think you can just get close enough, but it can never be perfect, right? Yeah. So thanks for giving your insights on that topic. I
And
mean,
you,
you
you
are
can
a
test.
great. Sorry, come
You
again.
can also, you can also test. I mean, the parallel trends assumption you can test, right? In the pre-periods, you can use typically, that's why you want to use event study, because event study, you will have the pre-shock coefficients, and basically it's a
Yes.
good test for the parallel trends assumption because you want all the coefficients in the pre-periods between the two groups to be not statistically different from zero, which is a good way also. Again, I mean, it has limitation, 100% what you have said.
Yeah.
But I mean, you also can combine this with some statistical testing. But sorry, you wanted to ask something else.
No, no, I think you kind of preempted my question, but you're right. I mean, one of the reasons that I prefer DID over SCM is because of exactly this. You can do a parallel trend check, right? But can you do such kind of check in SCM? You can't, right? Of course, you've got to a point where you've got a synthetic twin, but is the synthetic twin really a twin of your treatment market? That remains to be answered, right? So, yeah. that's a good, thinking. So one of the question, one of the participants, if you recollect, asked you is that you are a great believer in the power of ML as well as causal inference, and kind of bring those two together. You also had an interesting meme. We will, of course, share that meme. I'm also a big Dragon Ball Z fan. And the fusion of that is causal AI that you have put forth excellently. Can you talk more about it? Like, I know it's a very new field. Uh, what can people expect from it? What is the drawing power, so as to speak, of causal AI?
Yeah, fantastic question. I love to speak about this. Indeed, it's a really growing field, but still, which is very well rigorously tested and come from scientific research, mainly from, let's say, Susan Atte from Stanford, from Viktor Chernozhukov, Guido Imbens, so Nobel laureates in economics from MIT. So again, you really have these very solid models and a lot of work more recently by Professor Martin Huber, also in Switzerland. So long story short, basically, we have talked early that you have traditional AI and predictive inference. And on the other, you have another toolbox called causal inference. You want to answer causal things. There are different toolboxes to answer different questions, and you should not mix them for the reason we highlighted. Predictive inference relies on correlation. Then, it led to the second step, basically. We discussed earlier also this very hot topic that actually you should use them together in the following sense. Traditional AI, predictive AI, requires the use of causal AI to measure the business impact. So you deploy a recommendation algorithm, you want to use causal inference to know the business impact of this recommendation algorithm. Same with a chatbot, same with this AI model. So you need to use them both. And in particular, predictive inference, predictive AI, needs causal inference. Now we arrive in this final step, unification, the one you just mentioned, causal AI. Causal AI is kind of the opposite relationship, is when you use predictive inference to help with causal inference. When you use predictive AI to help with causal inference. And you can do this at several steps, several stages that I will highlight mainly three main applications. So that's one thing. Something that I really want to stress, because many people see the term causal machine learning, causal AI, and they think now it adds to the confusion. Basically, they think that now they can use AI for just traditional predictive AI model to do causality. It's not the case. It's still not the case. Causal AI is still you start with causal inference. And then basically you sprinkle a little bit of predictive inference, predictive AI to help you. So let's highlight three use cases. The first is about A/B testing and how to augment A/B testing. So basically in A/B testing, traditionally what we have been doing to measure the effect of some campaigns and compare options is to compute the difference between, in the simplest case, between two options. And you see higher conversion is in option A compared to option B. Good. Many people would just want to roll out and implement option A. The thing is, when you do this, historically in causal inference, we focused on average treatment effect, AT. We want to measure the average effect of the treatment. So on average, the conversion was higher with option A. Good. On average, it's a good metric. It's a useful metric. But the average, of course, has some limitations. It hides the variability, the heterogeneity. And essentially, what we can do with causal AI is uncover the heterogeneous treatment effect in a very efficient way. It's basically you roll out your A/B testing, and then in a second step, so you roll out A/B testing with traditional causal inference, and in the second step, you use a predictive AI algorithm that is made for this, for example, causal forest, which will uncover, it will try to discover subgroups who answered differently to the treatment. It will try to understand what are the subgroups who really liked option A, who really liked option B, and so on and so forth. So it allows you to see that maybe on average it works better for option A was preferred, but you have a subgroup that actually really preferred option B. And then this helps to do some personalization to answer the fact that we know that the world is complex, and hence to be way more efficient with our recommendation because it adapts to the different target audience. So that's one one thing. It's one application, heterogeneous treatment effect with causal forest. The second one is the one I taught during our joint class, during your class where you invited me, which is double machine learning. So it starts like this. If you've done a bit of causal inference, you know that the foundation of causal inference is basically you want to control for the confounders. So you want to measure the effect of X and Y, and you have a bunch of confounders, meaning things that affect X and Y, and you want to capture their effects. Backdoor path, you have different terminology. Block the backdoor path. But one thing that many people, and I'm obsessed about functional form because many people forget about this, is that many people will say, well, you know what, I will just include these variables as controls, as control variable in a multiple linear regression. When they do this, usually they don't think twice. They just include them as linear controls without pausing for a second thinking. Maybe this is a strong assumption. Maybe they have non-linear relationships. Maybe they have interaction effects. Maybe the functional form of what we call the nuisance function, the function of the controls, is very complex. And basically, machine learning is really good as to find good functional form. So that's the essence, basically the starting point of double machine learning is we are going to give to a machine learning algorithm the task to find the best functional form for the nuisance function, for the function of the controls. That's basically the essence. You know that it's a bit more complex and involve a two-step
Yeah.
methodology. Actually, more than two steps because you have three different computations.
Yeah,
And
somebody
maybe the
on the
last one.
internet,
Oh, please,
yeah,
please.
yeah, somebody on the internet, I don't remember who, but I would love to give him credit. They said that double ML is actually WFL theorem on steroids. You know, the Frisch wall theorem. I mean, of course, it's a deep topic, but you know, most of the people who know about this already can relate to it. What's your take on that? Do you think you know, double machine learning (DML) is actually, you know, W FWL on steroids?
Yeah, I think honestly, most of the time I include this sentence in my slides because I really like it. I think it's exactly this. And usually when I teach DML, I would start with FWL, where basically you see the methodology to understand the structure of a multiple linear regression. And then here you understand that when you are radializing each variable, so your outcome and your explanatory variable, instead of to residualize, to find the function of the confounder, you use ML in each of these residualizing steps. So I think, in my opinion, it's a perfect framing.
Great. Yeah. So, I mean, the other topic that keeps coming up in the causal world is DAG, right? Of course, we have had a lot of debates and fights around it. I mean, economists believe that, you know, DAG is useless, but then epidemiologists, they think that, oh, no, it's so useful. I think Judea Pearl and Guido Imbens, you know, they had a nice little debate. I mean, we can, you know, leave the links to those debate in the comments. What's your take on that? I mean, I personally believe that yes, of course, DAGs are very useful, but it's also, you know, should be used with a lot of caution, right? Just because you have drawn a DAG doesn't mean that you have proved causality. My opinion is that DAG is something that comes after you have proved causality rather than a hypothesis generating mechanism. What's your view on that?
So it depends how you use the tool. As usual, it's not really the tool that is a problem, it's how we use it. And I really like healthy debate. And I'm a trained economist, but I still draw tons of DAG and usually argue you should start there. And what I mean by this is just basically it helps to state your assumption and visually show your assumptions. And I think that is central because you want to be sure you know that you have bad controls, you have stuff that you don't want to include. It's not like in predictive inference when you can throw the features and let the model select. Here you have features that you should not include, for example a collider, and you have to state your assumptions very precisely. So that's why I always start with the DAG because it's visual, it shows the assumptions. You have these confounders, I include them. We have these unobserved confounders, fixed effects will take care of this. And this is, again, a very hot topic because I just shared this paper that I discovered showing that fixed effects, which is usually the kind of the Swiss Army knife from the econometricians, can create some collider bias issues. So you really, and that's a reason, again, to draw the DAG to be very clear what are the factors that are taken into account by the fixed effects. That's one thing. The other thing, sure, I mean, the A in DAG, I really don't like it, the acyclicity. Why? Because in most of the cases, use cases that I had in my scientific research career, you had simultaneity or reverse causation, which is creates cycles. And then, of course, people might argue, but it's not really simultaneity. If you break down, you have also this nice paper about, it's called something like the importance of the time decomposition in DAG, something like this. And indeed, for example, if you think about COVID, it's lockdowns affect cases, but cases affect lockdowns. And basically, but you can always say, okay, it's cases in t-1, which affect lockdown in t, which affect cases in t+1. But it depends the t. And the t, sure, you can say it's a second, and then you can argue that it's not instantaneous and you don't have a cycle. But actually, the indices should be based on the granularity of the data, which is basically if you have daily data or weekly data or yearly data, you probably have some simultaneity based on this granularity. So it breaks down the whole acyclicity thing. So long story short, when I use DAG, it's not to solve, to prove anything. It's just to highlight the assumptions of the model. So that's my take on DAG, and often I call them directed graphs, and I drop the A because sometimes I'll allow and or even recommend and recognize that you have cycles.
Yeah, I think there's also another graph, which is the single world graphs. I mean, that's also a useful supplement to DAGs, especially if you want to represent, your control and treatment group in the same graph. I think DAG does not do that, but at least Swigs kind of do that. Right. Yeah, but thanks for weighing in on that. Uh, I mean, one question, anybody who's starting with causal inference is asking is that how do I get started? I mean, what are the introductory books that you would say a person should read, to get up to speed with causal inference?
Yeah, so I think that that's a perfect way to wrap up, because that's
Mhm.
basically one of the first thing I shared, and I'm really glad to finish with this. I wrote everything in this guide, and we can share it the how to learn causal inference for free and on your own and for free. So long story short, I think you have some prerequisite. So you need to understand statistics, linear regressions, coding to be able to implement these things. So these are prerequisites. Then how to start? I usually recommend to start with, it depends the background, but I really like to start with Matheus Facure's book because it's concise, it's very applied. If you take the free e-book, which is different from the printed one, but the Causal Inference for the Brave and True, which is free online, you have lots of memes. It's really accessible, very, very nice read. Then I recommend, once you read this chapter, to move to Scott Cunningham books and read the full chapter, which is a bit, usually you have more math, it's more involved, but writes beautiful. It's really a beautiful book. And I really like just reading again chapters in this book. And I think these two will create a very good foundation. So once you understand, about coding, linear regressions, these basic concepts and statistics, which are the
If I may
basic of.
ask, what about the classics, right? I mean, classics from Guido Imbens, Judea Pearl, and I think there's also Angrist. If I recollect the name correctly, it is mostly harmless economics, something like that. That was the name of the book. I don't recollect it quite well, but perhaps you can correct me. And what's your opinion on those books? Can a person starting out for causal inference, can he or she, go and refer those books, or is it too hard for them?
Yeah, so a very good question. So, and actually, I spent many years reading most of these books, many of these traditional books. During my years in academia, they were never recommending Matheus Facure or Scott Cunningham. Mainly, it was mostly harmless econometrics. Before this, in PhD school, we focused a lot on Woolridge, Hayashi. So these books are really good, really interesting. But having spent years studying them, reading them, I just prefer Matheus Facure and Scott's books today. And I think the other one, I mean, still Angrist and Pischke, so mostly harmless econometrics, is a really good book. It's a really good precise book, but still that helps you to in an approachable way. I mean, it's a less
Understood.
technical, lower level of math that maybe Woolridge or Hayashi, but still, I mean, for me, it will be really and Judea Pearls. I mean, the Book of Why, for example, that's not necessarily the first one I will recommend or recommend at all, in my opinion. And I know that might shock many people, but I mean, if you really want to apply these things, it's not really with Judea Pearl's book. It's really interesting for the thought, for to understand this ladder of causation, which personally I never use, but that's an interesting book for general interest, in my opinion. And again, I know that I might really shock many people, but I would definitely recommend Matheus and Scott first, eventually Angrist and Pischke, mostly Harmonic Econometrics, which is really great as well.
Talking about books, are you writing any book? I don't want to, let the cat out of the bag. I don't want to spoil the surprise, but you can let your audience know.
Thank you very much for asking. So yes, so yes, I'm writing this causal mindset book, and we'll see. I mean, I'm deep into a discussion with a publisher now. Also, I want to make things available, so I don't know if I will make it available anyway, like Scott or Matheus as a form of a first version. I'm considering this for this year. So we'll see. Hopefully, I will be able to share precise information. Either I'll publish a first free version online, or hopefully I'll be able to find a right pathway with the current publisher. I'm discussing this, but hopefully later this year we'll have basically this available, the causal mindset, which helps to understand all these concepts for technical and non-technical people.
You will have a pre-order from my side, at least for sure.
Thank you a lot, Venkat.
Yeah. And the last few questions, right? You and I are believers in Gen AI. Of course, we know the limitations of Gen AI. They hallucinate, but you should not use them for the core statistical or causal aspect, but for dissemination of information. Those are really powerful. If I remember correctly, you also designed a chatbot which kind of, help people get up to speed with causal inference. So can you talk more about what was that chatbot all about?
Yeah, so that was actually the third aspect of causal AI, which you can call it also, I'll call it causal AI. It's basically within AI, for sure, you have generative AI, in particular LLMs. It's difficult to ignore these days. And LLMs will not prove causality, but they are very good at questioning causality. And I realized this already at the very beginning of ChatGPT 2.5, so early 2023, I realized that it was really good to challenge causal claim. So basically, I created a custom GPT where it helps people to apply this causal mindset knowledge. You share a fact, you share some statements, you share a question, a causal question, even a graph, and it will help you to understand and challenge causality and also guide you on how to potentially prove causality in this particular setup. So this is a tool I really find useful. I've witnessed, and people came back to say, okay, it's very helpful to also empower you in the sense it won't make you like dependent. It's training you to apply these concepts to your daily life. And then basically what I've done to create this is really I forced a subversion of ChatGPT to listen, to read my book, to listen to my talks and apply these concepts. And then basically it breaks down and try to find confounders, question external validity, other type of biases, and suggest pathway to measure causality's estimates. So yes, LLMs will not prove causality, but they're very good to help with the domain knowledge part that is central in causal inference.
What is the name of your bot? Sorry, I didn't get that.
It's called the Causal Mindset. So it's
Oh,
it's
the
the
causal
same as the
mindset. Okay.
company. So basically, if you go on the causalmindset.com, you have a page, the app page, and you can go. It's free. You can use
Okay.
it.
So I think the audience can benefit from it. Yeah. Last question. I mean, there's also a debate around R is better or Python is better. I have personally used R for a lot of causal inference because, as you know, there are so many rich libraries out there. But just to educate the people on the Python side, right? What are the popular causal inference libraries that you can cite, where people can, dive into the rabbit hole and, benefit from it?
Well, usually I come from Stata. Stata was fantastic for econometrics. If only it was not so expensive, I would have stayed there. And I think it's also the problem with expensive is I'm still affiliated to many universities, so I can have it, but not my audience. So I really want something accessible. So I moved also to Python. And more importantly, now that I'm also into the machine learning and causal AI, causal machine learning, Python is really efficient for this. So it's also really versatile and great to use Python. So about the libraries, the main library I use and I really love this day is double ML. So it's to do double machine learning. It's very rich. The help file is fantastic. It's very clear. Lots of case studies. So to do double machine learning, double ML is very powerful. Else to do some linear regressions, you have many basic statistical packages where basically I will build my own precise multiple linear regression, even if it's to build so you have panel OLS for two-way fixed effect or things like this. Sure, but usually I like to really build from scratch with different packages. I don't have a preferred for statistics or one directly in my now stats model. But the the other things I was thinking is now you also have this idea of integrating LLM knowledge to do causal inference. You have now PyWhyLLM, which is sounds very interesting. And I haven't tested, they just released this recently, but basically you can now interact with the chatbot within Python to question causality in a very streamlined, efficient way with this exciting new package called PyWhyLLM that I really want and have to test a bit more, but I invite people to have a look.
Nice. I think the audience will definitely benefit from this. Uh, Overall, thanks, Quentin. This was a really great talk. A lot of new rich insights, and I'm sure you'll come back again because I want to pick your brain on more advanced topics. Today we just kind of skimmed at the surface level. I want to ask you about ATE, ATT, and the similarities between ATE and T-test. There are so many questions. That once we go down deeper into the rabbit hole, it becomes much more exciting. And I'm sure we will have you back. But for today, I'm extremely grateful to you for your time and thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to be here. Always a great pleasure to collaborate and glad to know you and to have you in my network. Thank you.
Thank you, Quentin, for joining us. That's it, folks, and we'll see you in another episode.